Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the People's School for Marxist-Leninist Studies. Today is December 3rd, 2024, and tonight our class is going to be on mass organizations in the communist movement. A few reminders before we begin tonight. As always, the People's School for Marxist-Leninist Studies is a Party of Communist USA sponsored school, so this does allow us to bring in a wide variety of topics and discussions. And with that, we shall get started with the presentation. So tonight we'll be breaking everything down to three sections. We'll be looking at the Soviet Union's mass organizations, or the trade unions themselves as mass organizations and their importance in the movement, early American mass organizations and quotes by leaders about the mass orgs, and then later American mass organizations. And we will start off tonight with Soviet mass organizations.
All right, Soviet mass organizations. Earlier Soviet mass organizations and / trade unions. From V.I. Lenin, the trade unions under the new economic policy. Contact with the masses, i.e., with the overwhelming majority of the workers, and eventually of all the working people, is the most important and most fundamental condition for the success of all trade union activity. In all the trade union organizations and their machinery, from bottom up, there should be instituted and tested in practice over a period of many years a system of responsible comrades who must not all be communists, who should live right among the workers, study their lives in every detail, and be able unerringly on any question and at any time to judge the mood, the real needs, aspirations, and thoughts of the masses. They must be able, without a shadow of false idealization, to define the degree of their class consciousness and the extent to which they are influenced by various prejudices and survivals of the past. And they must be able to win the boundless confidence of the masses by a comradely attitude and concern for their needs. Again, continued. One of the greatest and most serious dangers that confront the numerically small Communist Party, which, as the vanguard of the working class, is guiding a vast country in the process of transition to socialism, for the time being without the direct support of the more advanced countries, is isolation from the masses. The danger that the vanguard may run too far ahead and fail to straighten out the line, fail to maintain firm contact with the whole army of labor, i.e., with the overwhelming majority of workers and peasants. Just as the very best factory with the very best motors and first-class machines will be forced to remain idle if the transmission belts from the motors to the machines are damaged. So our work of socialist construction must meet with inevitable disaster if the trade unions, the transmission belts from the Communist Party to the masses, are badly fitted or function badly. It is not sufficient to explain, to reiterate, and corroborate this truth. It must be backed up organizationally by the whole structure of the trade unions and by their everyday activities. Trade unions in the USSR. The original mass organizations within the Soviet Union were, in fact, the trade unions themselves. The Communist Party of the Soviet Union saw it as their task to win over to the Soviet state the members of these mass non-party organizations, while leaving them their character as organizations that are open to workers of various political views and attitudes, to party as well as non-party workers, to the literate and illiterate, religious and non-religious, etc. These trade unions were viewed as schools of communism, where the broad masses of workers could be trained in the art of managing socialist industry and gradually also agriculture. In the trade unions in the USSR, workers could further their education and had access to trade union-owned resorts, sanitariums, vacation areas, and community events.
Thank you, Comrade. With that, we will break for a round of discussion. Comrade, you have the floor. Go ahead. Yep.
Yeah, thank you. I just want to stress something. It wasn't really mentioned here, but in left-wing communism and infantile disorder, Comrade Lenin stressed that even in the reactionary unions, we must be there to do the same work, and they serve as the same school of communism. And it is important because we must be in there to bring the reactionary trade unions to the left, to revolution, to a revolutionary point of view. Because without us, the workers there will have nothing more than trade union consciousness. Thank you.
And going off the reading earlier as well, and based off that other reading of left-wing communism, we also do not want to be too far ahead of the masses nor tail behind them. We want to be where the workers are so that we can actually build class consciousness.
Yeah, it strikes me as important that these Soviet trade unions had lots of opportunities for like workers to have common leisure and hang out with each other and have kind of downtime with each other, and that those events seem like the best possible place for us to get amongst the workers, even if we're part of these unions, and really get to know them and kind of do our agitation and political work. And it strikes me that even though unions in America have some vestiges of like education, things like this, there's not a lot of common hanging out that the workers do. I'm finding that as a challenge where I am also.
I can agree with that because my union's spread out among 5 different states, and so it's very hard to get all of us together at one area in person.
Yeah, I read Behind the Urals. Now, this was the time between 1930 and 1940 when Stalin was trying to industrialize a whole bunch of steel mills, what do you call it, east of the Urals to protect them from the German invasion, which they knew there was coming. Now, everyone was, this was a desert, what do you call it? It was uninhabited. And building steel mills, they had about 4 or 5, requires a heck of a lot of space, a heck of a lot of workers, so on and so forth. So they would be working on trying to get as many people in as they can. It was tough work. I know they were all united because they really wanted to get into the industrial age. The workers worked hard, but there was school available for them every single night when they got off their shift, because they were trying to educate them and bring them up to speed as far as engineering goes and everything else. And most of the workers there took advantage of that program. So it was very hard work, and they lived in barracks, but they did also, what do you call it, have time off so that they actually had to be transported to a nicer place to have time off, because on the steel mill properties, it was all mud, that mud in summer and ice in winter. But I just wanted to say that they weren't kidding when they wanted their people educated.
Quality of life for the workers in the Soviet. It's stuff that I've read, and it's become a bit apocryphal because I didn't remember to record the sources, unfortunately. But some of the things I remembered reading about life in the Soviet Union for laborers is that most commonly, when they went out to do their work, when they were working a lot of hours, they would actually have to, the cadre of the Communist Party would actually tell supervisors and management to get on their workers to take their vacation time and not just, strongman through their career and work relentlessly. Like they would force people to take vacations. That's completely unheard of if you work any kind of job whatsoever. Other things I can think of off the top of my head is that there'd be all sorts of resorts for workers. There'd be all sorts of really nice stuff like Crimea, which is, as we know, a bit of a hot zone right now, was considered a primo vacation spot for workers all across the entire Soviet Union. Lots of good stuff for workers over there.
When I was in the Soviet Union, the trade unions had their own hotels. It's very interesting. The trade unions had their own hotels all over the country. They even had tours that the trade unions ran for their membership when they were on vacation. Okay, and that included going to the sunny beaches of the area on the Black Sea. Okay, or they could have went to Murmansk to go skiing or wherever, but that was common there. But I want to mention something that's important. In the 30s and 40s, the CIO unions, not the AFL-CIO, the CIO unions during the 30s and 40s had their own hotels and their own resorts. So their ads were in Masses and Mainstream and other. So therefore, you belong to a trade union, and they pay in the 30s in this country, and they had their own resorts that were very cheap. Thank you.
Thank you, Comrade Angelo. And yeah, it seems like nowadays even the staff of the AFL-CIO are on strike now because they can't pay them, their own workers, a fair wage.
I mean, it's really important because, fact of the matter is a lot of people, all they want to do is go outside, wave the red flag, and they think that that is connecting with the masses for whatever reason. The crucial and fundamental aspect of building the working class movement here in America and the communist movement as well, the fact of the matter is, it's building relationships with people. And ironically enough, the only real way to do that is to be amongst working people and not to get way too ahead of them, but rather to actually be where they're at and physically, and also go through what they're going through. And that way you hold yourself accountable to the movement that you subscribe yourself to. So it's crucial that we understand this because, I mean, fact of the matter is running soup kitchens, picking up trash off the street will not do anything for anybody in the long run. That's all.
I think Lenin talks about, or I know Lenin talks about this in left-wing communism, where as the working class, we cannot just focus on the working class. And we could actually see that talked about in that last section where the unions actually pushed for education. And if you think about it, you could relate that to today in America, where if you just reduce it down to economic situations, well, you're forgetting why the priests or why the capitalists or why the students, their material interests, and maybe why the priests or a football field goaler pushes certain like reactionary tendencies against someone like LGBT people. So it's just something to think about. We could relate that to today, but that's also in left-wing communism. That's all.
Hi, I'm actually living in a very heavily unionized region of Indiana, luckily, but I found that many unions and many people in unions ascribe to rather a neoconservative worldview. And the trade unions in the US for quite some time have been neoconservative in flavor, let's say. So how do we build class consciousness among unionized workers when there is such a resistance to it?
I found that once you start actually talking to workers, they tend to realize on their own. And more often than not, some of the conservative ones tend to get it better than some of the liberal ones, the class aspects. I can only speak for here. The more historically neocon work is all the ones that realize that we're spending too much, wasting a lot of money going to Ukraine and Israel. So it's only a matter of time before pushing and trying to propagandize them, so to speak, at some point that they'll eventually catch on.
Yeah, so I'm not the big, I'm not Mr. Organizing. I mean, I don't know everything, but all I can say is that the worst thing that trade unions, like think about, like worst case scenario, when organizers go out to speak with workers, the worst case scenario is workers who are indifferent to their own problems. Workers who say, okay, cool, you mentioned all this, so what? You know, I guess a really big thing, in my opinion, would be to explain, hey, okay, so there's this thing going on, whether it be stripping away healthcare benefits or whatever, and here's how, even if it doesn't affect you immediately right now, here's how it'll domino effect and cripple you, along with everybody else around you. So that's all I got there.
Personally, I find it's really good to first connect with people on their own personal interests, like instead of immediately jumping into class warfare and talking about all how class politics are ignored. You can simply start as like, hey, haven't you noticed like bread's been getting really expensive? And it just can snowball from there, and suddenly workers will then start realizing like, oh, hey, maybe this system is not actually benefiting me. Um,
Yeah, and just one more thing on the neocon aspects of the labor movement. The labor movement tends to support U.S. imperialism because the leadership gets money from groups like the CIA. Wow, there's this thing in the U.S. right now it's called the Solidarity Center. And the Solidarity Center is an amalgamation of all different groups that were in effect during the Cold War. And these very involved in U.S. operations overseas, like the Solidarność movement in the 80s in Poland, in the Maidan coup in Ukraine in 2014, overthrowing Salvador Allende in 1973. And they were involved in El Salvador too, I believe. They're active all over the place. So a lot of leadership gets money, and the Solidarity Center is exclusively funded by the CIA. And then, of course, we support the World Federation of Trade Unions, the class-oriented center for the trade union movement across the world. Well, in 1949, the CIA and the AFL and NCAO, because they were still separate at the time, took money from the CIA to form what eventually became the International Trade Union Confederation, which is the current international trade union wing that is effectively operated by the CIA.
Yeah, I just wanted to say a bit more. I don't know if we're off this topic a bit much, but there's basically always room to have conversations with people to steer them in the right direction. It might be a small opening, but I think it's always there. If people respect you at least a little bit, either because you're just a solid person or you have a good work ethic or something like that, they'll at least be able to hear you out. And something said that was actually very important, which was, I don't know everything. That's an important thing to do. If you come across as a know-it-all or like preachy, then obviously people are going to shut down because that's annoying. But yeah, you can have conversations with very reasonably backward people, or who you would think are backward people, and a lot of them actually have a lot better understanding about certain aspects of the world or geopolitics than you would think. And it's just a bit by bit, just day by day conversations, and you do your part.
our second section is going to be on American mass organizations prior to 1945. Before the reading, though, we've got a short video to play, which was one of the educationals for the PCUSA, and this was on mass orgs.
From the time of Lenin, communists have used mass organizations, also known as transmission belts, as the primary means of spreading the message of the party to the people. The original mass organizations within the Soviet Union were in fact the trade unions themselves. The Communist Party of the Soviet Union saw it as their task to win over to the Soviet state the members of these mass non-party organizations, while leaving them their character as organizations that are open to workers of various political views and attitudes, to party as well as non-party workers, to the literate and illiterate, religious and non-religious, etc. These trade unions were viewed as schools of communism, where the broad masses of workers could be trained in the art of managing socialist industry and gradually also agriculture. In the United States, communists were quick to follow the lead of the Soviet Union in the development of their own mass organizations. The Trade Union Educational League, or 2L, which emerged organically within the context of the American trade union movement under the leadership of William Z. Foster, was made into a mass organization of the Workers' Party of America, later known as the Communist Party, USA, in 1922, after Comrade Foster visited the Soviet Union. The 2L implemented the policy of boring from within, seeking to raise the class consciousness of rank-and-file American trade unionists. Around the same time, the Communist International, or Comintern, based in the Soviet Union, set up pro-Soviet mass organizations in every country where there was a Communist Party. In the United States, this organization was called Friends of Soviet Russia. This organization promoted cultural exchange between Americans and the Soviet people, as well as material aid to help the Soviet people rebuild in the midst of the Russian Civil War. Friends of Soviet Russia also advocated for recognition of the Soviet government in a time when the American government still recognized the bourgeois Kerensky government. The mass organization which brought the Communist Party USA to new heights was the International Workers' Order, or IWO, founded in 1930. This organization emerged from the language federations, which were created by immigrant workers under the Socialist Party. Just as the Communist Party emerged from members of the Socialist Party who opposed World War I and supported the Bolshevik Revolution, the International Workers' Order emerged from the language federations for the same reasons and were under the leadership of the Communist Party USA. The IWO provided services to immigrant workers, most notably of which were old age security and healthcare benefits such as life insurance, burial services, and in-house doctors. The IWO also consisted of a collection of smaller mass organizations, each of which focused on a different cultural identity from ethnic groups which had immigrated to the United States in recent decades. These organizations included Jewish, Hispanic, Finnish, Slavic, Italian, and other ethnic formations. They provided immigrant workers with a support network of people from their own cultural and language backgrounds who held progressive views. In particular, having existed in the years leading up to World War II, these organizations had an emphasis on anti-fascism and support for the cause of labor. In 1933, the Communist Party USA then founded the American Committee for the Protection of the Foreign-Born, which protected progressive-minded American immigrants from oppression by the American government and from bigotry. The committee worked side by side with the International Labor Defense, or ILD, another Communist Party mass organization which provided legal support. The committee defended members of the Abraham Lincoln Brigade, an American group which fought fascism in Spain, against being denied re-entry into the United States because of their communist affiliations. In 1940, it also defended Harry Bridges, who served as president of the International Longshoremen and Warehouse Union, or ILWU, for 40 years. These mass organizations, especially when they embraced the Popular Front strategy brought forward by the Comintern at its 7th Congress in 1935, brought the Communist Party into the mainstream of American political life. In fact, prior to the McCarthyite purges of the late 40s and 50s, the Communist Party was the third largest political organization in the United States, behind only the Democratic and Republican parties. Thus, the mass organization approach was proven effective as a means to bring the communist movement into the American mainstream.
International Workers Order, IWO, language federations. IWO was an organization that provided workers with health and life insurance, medical and dental clinics, and provided newspapers, cultural and educational activities, and summer camps for its members. Included 15 different language sections, had over 200,000 members at its greatest height before the McCarthy era fractured the IWO and splintered the federations. Quotes on the mass organization from American Communists, Margaret Cowell, The Communist, 1938. The Central Committee of the party calls upon all party organizations to organize a campaign for improving mass work among women. Mass work among working class women and all working women in general must be regarded as one of the chief tasks of the Communist Party, which it carries on primarily with the forces of communist women. For the fulfillment of this task, all party members, and particularly the communist women themselves, must show constant initiative and concern. The reading and study of more basic literature, studying the decisions and resolutions of higher party committees, keeping posted on the activities of women. These are requirements of women comrades who are engaged in leading women's activities. There should be a check up on the number of women party members to see what work they perform in the party and in the trade unions to see whether these forces are correctly allocated, and then to create special organizations and organs consisting of women party members, together with the more advanced women sympathizers, for carrying out work among the widest masses of women. This should not deprive the women comrades of participation in general party and trade union work. New party cadres must be developed among the women who take part in the anti-fascist movement, in the trade unions, and the other mass organizations. Our party organizations are more conscious than ever before of the need for recruiting of women into the party. About 30% of the new members in the present recruiting drive are women. But there are not enough women recruited from the industries. This can be rectified as women's activities increase in the mass organizations. The party declares it is necessary to popularize in all ways and utilize for work among the masses of women all that the October Revolution has given the women of the Soviet Union. The popularization of the position of women under socialism and the recruiting of more women into the party are especially important, now that enemies of the working class and of the People's Front are trying to find their way into the women's movement. The Trotskyites distributed a leaflet aimed to sabotage the special women's activities during the time the Women on the Workers' Party of America projects in New York were demonstrating for the right to work. By exposing the fascist work of the Trotskyites, we can render the women's movement invincible to any such attempts to disrupt its unity. Quotes on the mass organization from American Communists. William Z. Foster, The Communist, June 1939. Our party, with its Marxist-Leninist training and the world experience of the Communist International to draw upon, has the task as the vanguard of the proletariat of helping energetically and drastically improving the organization methods of the masses. At the 18th Congress of the CPSU, Comrade Zdanov stated, "The distinguishing feature of our party consists in the fact that at all stages of its revolutionary activity, it has attached exceptional importance to the organization." He also spoke of the need of raising the organizational work to meet the demands of the political line. These statements apply with special force to the American Democratic Front movement. The future of our party will depend in large measure upon the extent to which it understands this fact and leads in necessary improvement of the mass organizations. The purpose of this article is to indicate and outline the main spheres of the organization work of the Democratic Front and the directions in which it needs strengthening. 1. Organizing the mass offensive. The first group of organizational tasks of the Democratic Front constitute the general problem of intensifying the offensive of the People's Democratic Movement in support of its economic and political demands. This task is, of course, not simply organizational in character, but political work of the highest type, and involving many questions of analysis, demands, timing, etc. It is a matter of sharpening up the struggle for democracy, peace, industrial recovery, equitable taxation, and all the other planks of the Democratic Front program. The political situation is ripe for speeding up the present too slow tempo of mass struggle. First, because the workers, farmers, and middle-class elements are in a militant mood and ready actively to support the New Deal program. Secondly, because the leaders of various key mass organizations, responsive to the militant mass moods, are willing to back up policies of the progressive advance. And thirdly, because the Roosevelt administration, despite its many shortcomings, is liberal and disposed to make a defense of democracy, peace, and the mass welfare. 2. Consolidating the toilers' ranks. The second group of urgent Democratic Front organizational tasks have to do with unifying the ranks of the various democratic mass organizations. The loose organizational forms and disconnected activities that we all see all about us are a great handicap to developing the offensive of the people against reaction and also to every other phase of the mass struggle. The necessary work of tightening up the ranks of the people's forces is not only organizational, but highly political. Thus, the new CIO unions confront the task of fully absorbing their armies of new members and of developing their new leaderships. Then there is the need to link the AFL craft unions more closely together by federations and amalgamations. Between the trade unions, farmers' organizations, there also exists a great need for closer relations and more consistent joint action. And every possibility to accomplish this increased solidarity must be explored. Other democratic groups, such as the national groups and the great predominantly proletarian fraternal orders, need greater internal unity and more mutual connections. All the many tasks of unifying the people's forces against reaction converge in the general necessity of linking together the innumerable economic, political, cultural, and social organizations of the workers, farmers, professionals, and small business elements into a broad democratic front in support of the New Deal program. 3. Recruiting the people's forces. As we have seen, the people of the Democratic Front and the specific preparations for a victory in the 1940 elections imperatively demand that the masses begin to go over onto the offensive and that they draw together their, at present, two disconnected movements into more compact forms. It is no less urgent also that the respective mass organizations be greatly strengthened by systematic recruiting of their ranks. In spite of all the organization work that has been done in recent years, the great mass of the people still remain unorganized. The 8 million trade unionists, for example, are only a fraction of the workers eligible to unions, and it is the same situation regarding farmers, youth, Black Americans, women, and professionals.
Many weaknesses in recruiting new members into the democratic mass organizations operate to slow down their growth, such as sheer neglect to take advantage of the favorable opportunity to secure new members, failure to utilize new methods, radios, movies, plays in membership campaigns for spontaneous recruiting activities instead of mobilizing the whole organization for determined membership drives. Failure to connect up recruiting with the economic and political struggles of the mass organizations. Behind all these weaknesses lies an underestimation of the increased role of the organization in today's struggle against reaction. The matter of systematically recruiting to enhance the strength of the mass organizations is a political organizational task of basic significance. It is also one of complexity. The mass organizations have rich experiences in this work, which should be made available to each other, but this is seldom done. In membership recruitment, communists especially should strive to be experts and the most active workers. Number 4, administration of mass organizations. The fourth general group of important organizational tasks in building the Democratic Front turns around the administration of the mass organizations. Good administration is vital to the development of the offensive and to all other phases of mass organization and struggle. Generally, it is a field to which we have paid relatively little attention as yet, but one where the need for betterment in organizational practice is also urgent. Most mass organizations commonly use horse and buggy methods of management that would not be tolerated in employers' industrial organizations. Perhaps the worst offenders in this respect are the trade unions, especially the AFL craft unions. Dangers in the work. In all our Democratic Front political and organizational work, stimulating the offensive, consolidating, recruiting, administering the mass organizations in every other phase, success is contingent upon constant vigilance and upon our doing a vast amount of mass political education to combat the ever-present dangers of right opportunism and sectarianism, as well as outright wrecking activities by Trotskyites and other agents of reaction. The broad masses of workers, farmers, professionals, and small tradesmen in this country want to fight against fascism. Our party, as the vanguard of the proletariat, must know how to utilize skillfully its Marxist-Leninist training to give the masses the good theoretical understanding, solid organization, and effective fighting tactics necessary for victory. During World War II, American Slav Congress, founded in 1942. Committee to Protect the Foreign-Born for Immigrants, formed in 1933 by Roger Nash Baldwin of the American Civil Liberties Union to defend rights of foreign-born. And I think you see America Youth for Democracy. American League Against War and Fascism changed policy in 1939 when the Non-Aggression Pact was signed. During the intermission, we can explain that. And that's when Tuel came about and Hands Off Russia. And there you see some of our publications, right? New Tasks, yeah, that last one was New Tasks by William Z. Foster under Labor Unity. Okay.
We'll now break for our second discussion round.
Yeah, this is amazing that you found this information. This goes against everything that the ultra left splitters who have left us are doing. We have the correct line. If you remember, there were those who told us Why are you wasting time on the mass organizations? Just concentrate on building the party. Do you remember that? Some of us here. How wrong that was. That idea from a 17-year-old kid, no less. To even think that we would take anything seriously from these people. Our history is clear what we have to do. And this writing now shows and verifies that what we're doing is correct. Thank you.
I think at the beginning of the reading, it said that Tool was formed organically. And I just think that's a curious word. I wonder if anybody can elaborate on what was meant by the formation of Tool being formed organically. Thank you.
Yes, first, Tool was formed outside of the party. For the first iteration of Tool was the International Trade Union Educational League, or ITOL, in the 1916s, about 1916. And then Tool was formed in 1920, both before William Z. Forster ever joined the Communist Party. And once Forster joined, it was brought in as a mass organization of the party. Basically it was formed organically among militant workers. Again, one of the key things they did was the drive to organize the meatpacking industry and the Great Steel Strike were two things that were organized with many of these workers. So it came out of a organic fight within the Chicago Trade Union.
60 seconds.
The Chicago, I forget what they called the AFL affiliate in Chicago. I don't know if it was the Labor Council. It might have been the Chicago Labor Council or the Central, but I'm not 100%
I believe it was the Labor Council.
Question for the facilitators: what year was that communist issue published in?
So the William Z. Foster one was June 1938, and then the earlier one by Margaret Cowell was August 1938. And I'm sorry, William Z. Foster was June 1939. If I said 38, I'm sorry.
So, so congratulations to the MAGA communists for being more reactionary than people were in the 30s. Round of applause, guys. Great job.
Echoing what has been said already, I think the word that was used was a spontaneous recruitment or spontaneous event coordinating. That is in the local areas. That is what I would say that's the anarchist way that is of organizing. And yes, we used to have people in our party espousing that. And good riddance. But the way that they said to do it would be a determined membership drive. So when we think of what we're trying to do with building an anti-monopoly coalition, I see that being determined, decided through democratic centralism. That's all. Thank you.
We'll now move on to our third section for tonight. And our third section is going to be American mass organizations after 1945.
And so what we'll do is talk about some of the organizations after 1945 in a brief description, and we'll be foreshadowing some other organizations as well that are around today. So here's one that was around and is around today, the Civil Rights Congress. So the Civil Rights Congress, civil rights organization founded in Detroit in 1946 by William Patterson, a civil rights attorney and a leader of the Communist Party USA. The organization's membership was drawn mainly from working class and unemployed African Americans and left-wing whites. In addition to focusing on African Americans, the Civil Rights Congress was concerned with protecting any Americans who had been charged under the Smith Act. And that was a federal law making it a criminal offense to call for the overthrow of the U.S. government or be an active member of any group or society that supported such a cause. That act was aimed at anarchist groups, I guess, but at groups such as the Communist Party USA and the Socialist Workers' Party. So we also have another organization here after the it'd be after the CRC. We have the National Emergency Civil Liberties Committee. And right there on the right, we have one of their publications, Rights. And so the National Emergency Civil Liberties Committee, the NECLC, until 1968, was known as the Emergency Civil Liberties Committee, was an organization formed in the United States in October 1951 by 150 educators and clergymen to advocate for the civil liberties embodied in the Bill of Rights of the U.S. Constitution, notably the rights free speech, religion, travel, and assembly. It was formed by civil rights advocates who disagreed with the decision of the American Civil Liberties Union, or the ACLU, not to participate directly in the defense of people charged with violations of the McCarran Act by advocating the overthrow of the U.S. government. So moving on, we have the Peace Information Center. And Peace Information Center, PIC, was an anti-war organization based in the United States, which provided information on peace initiatives in other countries and promoted the Stockholm Appeal, which the Stockholm Appeal was launched by the World Peace Council, I believe 2 weeks after the beginning of the Korean War, 19th March 1950, to promote nuclear disarmament and prevent atomic war. The organization was in existence not very long, unfortunately, but it has been revitalized by the American Peace and Information Center. So that only lasted from April 3rd to October 12th, 1950. Some of their members included, and sorry if I don't get these names right, but John, I think that's Rogie, W.E.B. Du Bois, John D. McManus, Paul Robeson, C.B. Baldwin, Albert E. Kahn, Johannes Steele, Gene Weltfish, Leon Strauss, Elizabeth Moss or Moose, Kyril Elkin, and Abbott Simon, and Shirley Graham. So there's that. And then we have the National Alliance Against Racist and Political Repression. That organization, the NAARPR, was founded in 1973 in Chicago, Illinois, and it grew out of the struggle to free Angela Davis, who's pictured there on the right, out of this, Angela Davis, from a quote-unquote racist frame-up on murder charges surrounding the aborted attempt by Jonathan Jackson to free his brothers. And there on the right, we have a picture of Angela Davis and with Reverend Ben Chavez and the American Indian movement leader, Clyde Bellecourt. They were announcing the formation of the NAARPR. And George Jackson and the Soledad brothers from jail in 1970. It was led by the Communist Party USA members and supporters, including Davis herself, and Charlene Mitchell, and Ann Brandon, and Frank Chapman. And I believe they have a new organization. We can talk about that later. So the rest of this section in the class is going to be from Build the Communist Party by Henry Winston, 1969. That will talk about what he wrote, I believe, on the 19th Congress for the CPUSA, and it will make connections of the different mass orgs, and also point to where the mass orgs were going to today. You'll see some common names, maybe in logos and whatnot. So here we go. So the decisive task, it says, what's to do under such circumstances when our party is small? The task is certainly not to be a firing brigade, running here and running there. That will not help the mass movement, nor will it help the party. What then is the task? Comrade Hall, in his report, put it most brilliantly. It is to find the link in the chain without which it is inconceivable that a lasting fighting movement against Wall Street, against monopoly capital, against the Nixon administration can be developed in this country. And what does Comrade Hall single out? The task of building or party among the decisive sections of the working class. The task of building or party in such a way that one understands the needs of the unity of the class on the basis of a fighting policy, beginning at the point of production. The task of anchoring the party in that stratum which can produce the cadre capable of understanding its class responsibility by beginning to recognize its relationship with the Black workers by fighting to join with, to broaden, deepen, and develop greater consciousness within the people's movements. So there's a picture of Gus Hall and Henry Winston. To organize and anchor itself in the basic industries with the working class as its pivot, a party must understand that it must also rally support to the fighting students, Black and white. It must be a party which gives support to any and all social struggles in defense of the vital interests of our people. The motor force in our history is centered in our class, in the working class, and our party is a class organization, the highest form of class organization, which must help this class to feel its responsibility to itself and to the people in general. This is how we have to understand the projection of the mass policies which Comrade Hall has laid down for us. But as you know, mass policies have meaning only when there is a fight to implement them. I said that the experiences between the 18th and 19th conventions indicated a growth of party membership within industry. Well, there can be a more rapid growth if we draw certain conclusions. Among them is the need to structure our leadership so as more rapidly to bring about changes within the labor movement. We must be able to help stimulate the developments among the rank and file. The fight for greater democracy in the unions, the advancement of the fight against racism in the shops, the special fight for the rights of women in the shops. We must be able to help fight for and give full expression in every way to equality for Black workers, for youth, and for women. Secondly, the proposal involves the establishment of commissions, which have the task of mastering all problems within their given fields, of becoming acquainted with those problems and being on top of them. These commissions have the task of putting on their agendas specific to and organizational questions, of developing regular checkup and control on the fulfillment of decisions as they are applicable to the given field of work. It means keeping minutes of every single commission meeting. It means opening the commission meetings with the reading of the minutes. This is important stuff, a simple trade union practice. It means that these minutes are read for the purpose of checkup. These commissions are arms of the party. They help prepare most thoroughly and most clearly questions for presentations and action by the party as a whole, and they are not independent institutions. Furthermore, the leadership must have an intimate daily relationship with the districts, with priorities given to the concentration districts. It must be a relationship which guarantees that the specific concentration industries for the districts have been decided upon, that the work of the party in respect to these industries is constantly reviewed and checked upon, and that every single member of our leading committees is responsible for a given industry. And he mentions this, comrade. I am happy to say that the Illinois district, the Midwest region, and comrade Jim West have already begun to put such an approach into effect. Comrades, one must ask whether it is not true that among us today it is possible to see the motes in the eyes of Black people, of men and women fighting for their rights, while we fail to see the motes in our own eyes. How is it possible to see those motes except by looking in a mirror? Communists must be the first to look and to draw the conclusions in terms of their own responsibility. So, how then should communists act? What conclusions should we draw? First of all, we should see the role of white workers in organized labor movement in the struggle against racism in every form. The building trades show the worst manifestation of racism, but it exists in every industry. Without struggling against this, the trade union movement cannot be mobilized to fight against job discrimination or to play its role in the communities. In short, the first duty of white communists is not to become experts on what Black people are doing, but to become experts on how to change things in white America. We have to think deep and hard, unlike the bourgeois liberals, of how to raise the fight against racism to a new high. This is the fight for unity of the class. This is the fight for white labor to understand its responsibility. This is the meaning of Karl Marx's statement that labor in the white skin cannot be free so long as labor in the Black skin is branded. So, moving on, but comrades, to fight in a mass way means that we have to steal or party. Let us think through a situation where comrades get up and deliver the most profound speeches, but where conventions can be held without the presence of a single Black, Chicano, Puerto Rican, or Indian delegate. How can that be? Even seats in Democratic Party conventions are being challenged for such reasons. Comrades, the fight against chauvinism must become a primary task of our party. Our party has always been regarded as a party of the Negro people. It must become that once more. In that way, we can move along with 7 league boots and build our party into a mass party in the United States. So we're going to mention or bring up just organizations that exist today that are pushing for this mass movement. I want to say some words about the Chicanos who fight for equal rights, for national rights, not only in the urban communities, but also on the land. Their struggles have great meaning in the fight against monopoly, in the fight against imperialism. In these struggles, there are domestic problems which must be solved, problems which call not only for unity among the Chicanos, but also for the Black in Chicano unity and the unity of both with whites. A great deal has been said about Puerto Ricans. Much more will be said. Much has been said about Indian Americans. Much more will be said. Both are in throes of great battles which, as they develop, bring more and more to the forefront the need for unity. The task of our party is to gear itself for leadership among these masses. And we should not make the mistake of concluding that because all 4 categories are opposed, there exists no enmity among them. In this connection, we should note the recent increase of white chauvinism and anti-Arab chauvinism among the Jewish people, including the increased influence of such ideas among Jewish communists and progressives. Or fight for unity, pressing the fight against monopoly and against imperialism, must also take this into account. Comrades, the United States is a big country. It is divided into major regions, each with its distinctive features, into urban and rural industrial and agricultural areas, a region of crucial importance is the South. Here, the rapid buildup and extension of our work is most essential. The party was always needed in the South, but today that need takes on even greater force if the kind of leadership required is to be given to the task of organizing the unorganized. Here lies the key to ending the wage difference between Black and white, between South and North. Here lies the key to the advancement of democracy in our own country. In all this, the party is an indispensable instrument. Or concentration policy must therefore place as a major task the building of the party in the South, first among the workers in basic industry, but also among those in the rural South, the tenant farmers and the agricultural workers. And finally, just really brief. So we mentioned, you probably saw some other organizations, and this is not an exhaustive list, but here's some other organizations that are in a coalition for an anti-monopoly front.
Especially that first reading, it really hit home, when you think about why the records did what they did this last iteration. Henry Winston said, our job when we are a small party is not to be the fire brigade, not to be running here and there. And that's exactly what all the records wanted to do 24/7 was they thought that we were a failure because we weren't going to every single protest because, they never actually brought people in that way, and the people they did bring in were mostly students and petty bourgeois elements. It never brought in the organized labor. So I think, that really showed how correct we were that we said, we were involved with some protests, but we were focused on building the party and getting more involved with labor.
Just a quick correction. These things they do now are charity. They're not mutual aid. What the IWO did was mutual aid. But one thing I noticed in that reading was Henry Winston talking about rank and file democracy. It's fitting that this was released in 1969 because the following year in 1970 was a large rank and file trade union rank and file trade union democracy conference in Chicago, which was the birth of the National Center for Trade Union Action and Democracy, or more colloquially known as Trade Unions for Action and Democracy, or TUAD, which was, successor to Tool and Sewell and a predecessor to Lowell, and was really was really the acceleration of the rank and file movement in U.S. labor, which ultimately led to, organizations like a trade unionist faction, not a trade unionist faction, Teamsters for Democratic Union, or Labor Notes, or although they come from a different background, or the rank and file group UAWD, United All Workers for Democracy, the UAW rank and file caucus, which ultimately elected Sean Fain as president of the UAW. Thank you.
This is a quick little thing, but you were talking about mutual aid, and I actually have to read a book that's a critique of mutual aid called Malcolm X Didn't Dish Out Free Bean Pies, Distinguishing Charity and Social Work from Revolutionary Strategy. That's all I really wanted to add.
Okay. I was just going to mention, we showed some pictures of some other mass orgs. Yeah, I think it's just important to keep this in mind. Like, unlike the Soviet Union, the U.S., the labor movement or the communist movement really started by, it would be in Eastern Europeans that had those language schools, and those were kind of organically built up and amalgamated in the party. But so it's really important to bring up all those factors of life, whether it's women's rights, it's against the racism of Muslims, or it's against the bigotry against LGBT plus people. Any of these things, it's connected to the working class. And I feel like a lot of people that ignore those issues or say that they're just bourgeois decadents are doing a huge disservice to the working class. That's all.
Yeah, a couple of things. When I was in my reading in I think it was the second part, the term reactionary was used a lot, and I just wanted to make sure that people understand that that's the last thing we are on, not. When someone, badmouths us, we do not attack. We say we stick to our guns, we stay stable. Anyone that talks with us 5 years ago, they're going to get the same answer now. So the reactionary is that something from outside, external, gets people upset and they respond. So that's why you hear some of our leaders in the past saying, that it's the reactionary movements that are a problem. And I just wanted to make sure people understood that. And the other thing was, yes, I'm glad that what's brought up mutual aid. Mutual aid is totally different than charity or any of that. Mutual aid is what many of our labor organizations did. They had health care, they had life insurance, burial insurance. That's mutual aid within an organization. So just want to make sure you got those 2 points. That's all.
Comrade Angelo, did you have something?
Yeah, I think there's an important word there I thought was interesting from Gus, who went to prison for being a communist, by the way, 7 years. Not like these young kids today, or they run around with a red flag and they think they're a communist. It's ridiculous. But he said something is interesting, and history proves it. Our allies are in the liberal movement. That's going to be shocking to a lot of young people today. We're fed to believe, and it came out of the New Left, which I was in, and I remember hearing this, that the enemy is the liberal. That the liberal tries to co-opt our message. That the liberal tries to do this. That you scratch a liberal, you find a conservative. All these kinds of things. Gus says it very clear. Our allies are the liberals. But it only means they're allies. That's a place we can work with them. This idea that's coming out today that our allies are conservative people in the social life of the United States is ridiculous. The very nature of conservatism is to preserve capitalism. Liberalism means opening up.
60 seconds.
Listening to new ideas. Remember, the French Revolution was an expression of liberalism. So that's clear what Gus was saying, because during the period of Franklin Delano Roosevelt, our allies and fellow travelers were the liberal movements, including Eleanor Roosevelt, the president. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, and like Angelo says, it's the ultra left that is our problem. So it's not the liberals, it's the ultra left. And he forgot to add that, but that's what he's been saying and has been proven right for a heck of a long time. That's all.
With that, we will go to our wrap-up sections. The New Outlook Publishers is our sister publishing house, and for an update on that, I will turn the floor over to Comrade. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you. Please visit our partner publishing house, New Outlook Publishers. You can find a lot of great works there, including our 2 latest releases, Communist and the LGBT Plus Struggle and Anthology Volume 2, and What is Socialism by Nemi Sparks. Of course, you could also find the latest issue of The Communist, Volume 4, the Ideological Journal of the Party of Communist USA. And of course, there is one related work to tonight's class, as Henry Winston's Built the Communist Party can be found in the selected works of Henry Winston, Volume 1. Once again, you can find all that work at newoutlookpublishers.store, and purchasing books from New Outlook Publishers helps support the school.
we're going to skip the closing song for time, though. So I would like to thank everyone for coming by tonight. Have a good evening and take care.